Racial segregation was a huge problem for South Africa throughout the 1900s. It was widely practiced through the use of laws and policies. However, in 1948, the National Party, which was a white-dominated political party, took over office and pushed these policies even further. They established the apartheid, which segregated the white minority from the non-white majority, permitted political and economical discrimination against anyone who wasn't white, and restricted non-whites' basic rights. Nelson Mandela, former president of South Africa and human rights activist, is known as the man who helped bring an end to the apartheid. Nelson Mandela faced many conflicts and endured many hardships during his journey to abolish the apartheid. He helped establish a country where everybody's voice was heard. Here is his story.
Nelson Mandela, the fight for equality, diminishing racial segregation conflicts throughout South Africa.
Nelson Mandela first started politics in 1944 when he joined the African National Congress, where he became the leader of their youth group. He held other leadership positions at the ANC, where he helped revive the organization and oppose the apartheid policies set by the National Party. However, Mandela's commitment to politics and the African National Congress grew particularly stronger after the 1948 election victory of the National Party. He strongly opposed the National Party and apartheid. He soon began to gather supporters and lead peaceful protests against the National Party. In 1952, he helped lead the African National Congress's campaign for the defiance of unjust laws. He traveled across the country to organize protests against the discriminatory policies of the apartheid. However, his actions came with a cost. Mandela's participation in anti-apartheid activism caused him to be seen in the eyes of the ruling National Party, making him a target of the authorities.
In 1952, he was banned from traveling, organizing groups of protesters, and from giving public speeches. Although he did not let this stop him, he continued his movement of peaceful protesting. In 1955, he promoted a manifesto known as the Freedom Charter, which was ratified by the Congress of the People. The Freedom Charter was a document calling for racial social democracy in South Africa. In 1952, he, along with his friend Oliver Tambo, opened up South Africa's first black law firm. Together, they offered legal counsel for free or at low cost to the people affected by the unjust ruling of the apartheid. However, his actions came with a cost. In 1956, he was arrested along with over 100 other political leaders on charges of treason. Eventually, everyone arrested was acquitted of the charges in 1961 after a 4-year-long trial. During the trial, tensions between the National Party and the African National Congress grew stronger. A militant faction was formed of the African National Congress called the Pan-Africanist Congress. In 1960, tragedy struck. Police opened fire at peaceful protesters in the town of Sharpeville, killing 69 people, including women and children. The massacre resulted in widespread panic, riots, and anger all over the country. Soon after the massacre, the government banned both the African National Congress and the Pan-Africanist Congress. In response to the attack, Nelson Mandela decided it was time for a change in his tactics. He decided he would no longer tackle this conflict with a non-violent and peaceful approach. He began fighting with a more radical approach. He started advocating acts of sabotage and violence against the apartheid government. He realized it would be the only way to succeed.
We have made it very clear in our policy that South Africa is a country of many races. There is room for all the various races in this country. That it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
After the African National Congress and Pan-Africanist Congress was banned, Nelson Mandela went underground, where he eventually became one of the founders of the Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation, which was a military wing of the African National Congress. In 1962, he left South Africa to Algeria for a short while for training in guerrilla warfare and sabotage. Shortly after his return on August 5th, he was arrested at a roadblock. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for leaving the country. However, in October in 1963, Mandela and several other men were tried for sabotage and violent conspiracy in the infamous trial known as the Rivonia trial. Before Mandela's sentencing for the case, he gave a speech.
I have fought against white domination. And I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
Mandela's speech inspired many people, not only in South Africa but globally. Sadly, on June 12, 1964, Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life in prison. However, Nelson Mandela's fight doesn't end here. The government tried to silence a voice. However, they only succeeded in amplifying it to a global scale. People were outraged when they heard of Nelson Mandela's imprisonment. As the many years went by, protests increased throughout the nation and became more violent than ever as the people yearned for Mandela's release. In 1980, Oliver Tambo, fellow anti-part, with increasing tensions in South Africa at the brink of a full-fledged civil war, the government believed it was time to start listening. They made many negotiations with Nelson Mandela and offered him freedom many times in return. They suggested that he renounce the use of violence and acknowledge a policy of the apartheid that assigned people to specific areas. However, Nelson turned down all offers to be released, stating, "Only free men can negotiate. A prisoner cannot enter contracts." After giving Mandela many opportunities for freedom, F.W. de Klerk decided that there was no way the apartheid could succeed with violence increasing nationally and tensions increasing globally. On February 11, 1990, the government under President Frederick W. de Klerk released Nelson Mandela with no strings attached. He was finally a free man after spending 27 years in prison. Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk then worked together and negotiated for a long time. Together they agreed on finally dismantling the apartheid and ratifying a new constitution that would give everyone a voice and form South Africa into a multiracial democratic country. After the end of the apartheid, Nelson Mandela's work still wasn't over. He ran for presidency in 1994 and was inaugurated as South Africa's first black president on May 10, 1994. Nelson Mandela formed a government where not just one person's voice was heard, but instead everyone's. Nelson Mandela, freedom fighter, human rights activist, and former president of South Africa, the man who abolished the apartheid.